All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code PODCAST5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Be Well by Kelly podcast. We made it to 2021. It feels like we're having a little bit of 2020 dragged into 2021, but we are going to move through it with today's guest, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. She is a certified fertility awareness educator and a holistic reproductive health practitioner who teaches women to chart their menstrual cycles for natural birth control, conception, and monitoring overall health. In her new book, The Fifth Vital Sign, Lisa debunks the myth that regular ovulation is only important when you want children by recognizing the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. She hosts the Fertility Friday podcast, and she's super fun to follow on Instagram at Fertility Friday. So without further ado, let's welcome Lisa to the show. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. You know that I am down a rabbit hole when it comes to women's health, fertility, infertility, pregnancy. Obviously, it's that season of life for me. I'm a few weeks away from giving birth to baby number 2. And today's guest is someone that I have been following along with for a long time, and just a beacon of knowledge and a bright light on Instagram. So someone you should definitely follow. Today's guest is Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. She's a certified fertility awareness educator, a holistic reproductive health practitioner, and the author of The Fifth Vital Sign, Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. She helps health-conscious women discover their connection between their menstrual cycles and their overall health so they can ditch hormonal birth control forever. Unfortunately, our education system has failed to teach us about our fertility. So she's here to empower and educate you to take control of your fertility. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no, it was super fun. Before we got started here, Lisa and I were talking about the fact that she has 2 boys and I'm going to have 2 boys, and she doesn't need a gym membership. And I was saying that I was chasing Sebastian on his scooter, and someone looked at me and went, maybe don't bring the scooter to the park when you're 9 months pregnant.
Yeah. I'm usually the mom where like my child has jumped off something extremely high, or they're like at the top of the tree and they're like, who's parent?
Yeah.
Where's the parent?
Yeah.
Those are mine. Okay.
Yeah, they're okay. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm like the helicopter parent. I'm like, where's my child? No, I know. I think it takes time, and it's like boys, they beat you down until you're like, whatever, we'll just end up at the ER if we end up at the ER.
Well, it's like I don't know. My experience has been that they're very outgoing, at least mine are. And so it's like, there's only so many times that, like now, if someone gets hurt and they're crying, I'm like looking at them like, are you bleeding? Yeah. Or if they're bleeding, it's like, okay, how big is the cut?
Yeah. It's good. It's good.
Bones sticking out. No, okay, go back to play.
Yeah. I love it. I love it so much. Well, I'd love to talk about our boys all day long. And, I'm obviously excited for number 2, but let's get to the nitty gritty because I know you have a limited amount of time. And I know that everyone tuning in is probably really interested in fertility and infertility. So can we just let the cat out of the bag and let people know how common is infertility?
Infertility it's on the rise, and I'm actually working on a new book project. So I might actually have the stats at the top of my mind. But what the research is telling us is that it's like 1 in 6 couples. And I think that I looked at a stat recently because I was legitimately working on a section that was kind of addressing some of these things. And I believe that the number that I put in that section was 72 million, up to 72 million couples worldwide. Yeah. So it's a big deal. It's affecting a lot of people. And I think when you're looking at infertility, there's a couple of facets of it that I think are important. So the definition of infertility, which is not what we think of necessarily, is that if you haven't conceived within 12 months of trying. And so I like to make the distinction between infertility and subfertility because of those couples that don't conceive within that 12 months, up to, and legit, the stats are like right on the top of my head because I was working on it, but 55% then from the studies that I was looking at go on to conceive within 36 months. Yeah. So what you have, like what we would think of as infertility is that you can't have a baby. But statistically, there's a big difference between having a delay in how long it takes you to conceive versus actually falling into the category where it's really not happening, regardless of what you try. And then you really need to go on to some form of artificial reproductive technology.
I mean, I think that's such a relief for everyone listening because when you see those big 72 million people worldwide, and I mean, I remember even just looking at the stats a few years ago and they were 1 in 8, and you're looking at the current stuff now being 1 in 6, but it is, coming from a science background and a healthcare background for 8 years in cancer and genetics, and then going into practice on my own, it is amazing what technology can offer couples. I'm really thankful that there are multiple ways that we can address infertility for people who are willing or open to that type of technology. Because it is so common and there are so many reasons why. So I love that it's not fear mongering. I love that it's, hey, if it's not in the first year, for most of you, or at least more than half of you, it's going to be in the next couple of years, which is great news. It's great news.
Well, and something else that is important, I think, when talking about it, of course, the way our culture looks at fertility challenges is that, it's the woman. Of course, like that's kind of how we look at it because we're the ones that have the evidence of this baby. We're the ones that carry, we're the ones that breastfeed, all of that kind of stuff. And so, again, when you're looking at the stats, male factor infertility plays a role half of the time. So it's not always exclusively male factor. So exclusively male factor, 20 to 30% of the time, but 50% of the time, and I think that this for a lot of women is a bit of a relief. I was talking about male fertility in one of my classes recently, and I had one of my students, if you will, message me, and she was kind of like, I'm really thankful that you talked about that in the class because I had never really thought that there was anything that my partner could do. She's not currently actively trying, she's avoiding and planning for the future, but she was kind of like, this was really helpful because now I know that both of us can actually contribute to this chance of fertility together. And even though we have this evidence, you're heavily pregnant right now, your partner walks around and he's fine, like no one could tell, but he is responsible for 50% of that genetic material. And even if you were to, for women who've experienced loss, for example, we often think it must be me, but even the quality of your partner's sperm can contribute to the chance of miscarriage. So I feel like it's not about slinging blame, obviously, but it's just about understanding that this is a multifaceted issue. Just like you said, there's many factors that come into play.
That's so important. Not owning like the guilt and the shame associated with miscarriage. I had a miscarriage before Sebastian. We get pregnant pretty quickly, but I'm always like, is it going to stick? Yeah. But it was a stressful, sort of a little bit of a stressful time. I was on my first book tour and we'd taken a vacation and like went for it, just like, okay, let's do this. And pleasantly surprised. But obviously like having that be my first experience getting pregnant, then I was diving into the research. How often does this happen? Why does this happen? Like what's causing this? And I think that that's really important. I like to be open about that, only because I think people think, oh, well, if you eat really healthy and if you like sleep and manage your stress and that like nothing bad is going to happen to you or that you're not going to experience loss or infertility or miscarriage. And I think that that is something I'd love for you to kind of dive into when it comes to causes of infertility and maybe even unexplained infertility or causes of loss.
Yeah. Well, I had a miscarriage also before my first child. And so I was charting, obviously.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who's charting, I knew that I was pregnant basically 2 weeks after ovulation because my temperature did not go down and I knew I was pregnant. But I miscarried very early on. So I miscarried then 3 weeks past ovulation, which is 5 weeks pregnant for anybody who doesn't know, because pregnancy is calculated from technically the last day of your first menstrual period. But what I found was that it was a very interesting experience because I've been tracking my cycles for, like a decade. And I'd never had,
into this. You're passionate about this.
Yeah, this is the thing. And so I'd never had unprotected sex during the window. And so I obviously thought that I would just get pregnant the first time. And it actually took us 4 cycles. So we're right on average. So the average couple takes, average healthy, everything's kind of T's are crossed, I's are dotted. It takes an average of 25, or there's a 25% per cycle chance. So on average, it takes about 4 cycles for conception. And so when I had my miscarriage, it was kind of like all of my friends who had miscarriages came out of the woodwork. And I had no idea how common it was. It was kind of like I was welcome to the club. Like everyone, like I had a miscarriage. I had too. I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
You never told me. You never said anything. I had no idea. And so just to speak to what you were talking about there, miscarriages is very, very common. So there's a study that I pulled from, they looked at over 600,000 women, Danish study. And overall, there was about a 13.5% chance of miscarriage. But then when you broke that down by age, I think this is where, this is the part that we don't really know and understand. Even 13.5 is pretty high if you think about it, because you wouldn't really think that it's so common. Like that's like 1 out of 6 pregnancies and a miscarriage across the board. But the women who were in their early 20s, it was more like 9%. So like under 10%. Whereas the women in their mid to late 30s was higher than that, kind of closer to 30%. But when you get into the early 40s, early to mid 40s, it was 50%, like half. And by the time we reached 45, it was 75%. So I delicately, when I'm talking about this with clients, because I think it is actually helpful to know this, but what it basically means is that when you're over 40, it's like you have to get pregnant twice to keep one. That might sound, I hope it doesn't sound like, mean or anything.
No.
But the reason that I say that, and the reason I say that in that way, is because when I'm working with women in their 40s, they have had miscarriages. When they're trying to conceive, it's most women have at that point, and so I feel that it kind of takes away, like you said, some of that guilt and shame. Like there must be something wrong with me, my body must be broken. When you find out, whoa, this is kind of how it is at this stage, and it certainly speaks to some of the challenges. And I would say a big challenge when it comes to fertility is just understanding the natural course, the kind of biological course of being a woman, right? From what happens through our reproductive life. Because most of us growing up, we learn incorrectly that you can get pregnant on every single day of the menstrual cycle. And not only can you're basically trained to think that you will. Like it's absolute certainty if your partner looks at you. And so I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But I guess my point is that when you think about it that way, I've talked to many women that are just as terrified of having an unplanned pregnancy when they're in their mid-30s as they were when they were 17. But at no point did it enter into the discussion that our fertility changes with age. And there can be different challenges at different ages. And it's not about fear mongering, because of course you can get pregnant in any cycle with ovulation. Yeah. Women do get pregnant at any age, but there are challenges. And so one of the reasons why it can be more challenging for women as we get older is because of that higher miscarriage rate. And that can be linked to some of the challenges with aging. So increased exposure to oxidative stress, like our body's older. If you've ever seen a banana turn brown, that's oxidative stress. But it's essentially, when you look at the research again, we're talking about changes to the microsomal or the chromosomal abnormalities, and increased chance of that happening. And it's on both sides. It's on the female side and the male side. Because although men don't have a menopause, we can't, if you still think the 80-year-old man's sperm is the same as the 20-year-old man's, you got to talk. Yeah. Men are also affected by aging. So I'll pause there and let you kind of, because I know you asked kind of a broader question about fertility, but I feel like that's a good segue into just this topic of miscarriage and how it relates to aging.
Definitely. I think, when we look at the past, and I just even look at my parents, my mom got married in her early 20s, started having kids in her late 20s. I look at Chris and I, we got married in our late 20s. We didn't even think about having kids until our mid 30s, so it's, to really understand that differentiation between age and miscarriage rate is, I think, really important too for planning purposes. Because if you're saying that on average, it's going to take 4 cycles, if everything is in your favor, then you're talking about, I think what we all think is exactly what you said. The minute someone looks at us, we will get pregnant. So if we have our perfect little plan in our mid-30s that we're going to start, getting pregnant, and we decide, okay, yeah, well, I'll get pregnant in June. So of course I'll just try in June because on my 35th birthday or whatever it is. And to really understand that, it's going to take time, and that the chances of miscarriage are there. Because even just looking back at my experience, I had planned it out, or Chris adamantly wanted a summer baby, and we had gotten pregnant to have a Memorial Day baby, and it was set a May due date for that first pregnancy. And obviously we're very excited about that. But once you go through something like that, it's like, oh, no, I just want to get pregnant. I'll have this baby in October. I'll have this baby on Christmas. 4th of July doesn't really matter to me anymore. I just want to have a child. So I think bringing to light how age changes our fertility and the reasons for that are really important. You bringing up oxidative stress, I don't think people realize how it really works. And that if you're living your life and aging, you're accumulating more oxidative stress year over year.
Yeah, of course. And also, I think many of us are kind of aware to some extent that as we get older, the chances of chromosomal abnormality increases. And that is part of the reason then why the miscarriage rate is higher. So, but this isn't all doom and gloom. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do to at least to the best of our ability to mitigate some of that. I mean, there's plenty of very popular supplements and certain dietary strategies and things that you can employ to minimize some of those effects. There's plenty of research on, the role of antioxidants in terms of supporting egg quality. So coenzyme Q10, one of the most studied for both sperm and egg health, is really crucial for mitochondrial function. And I mean, I could list, different ones if you want, selenium, folate, zinc, vitamin C, there's plenty of things that you can do. So it's not to say that you can't do anything, but I think the key though is to just understand, and it's what you said about planning. So you, as women, I feel that there's a lot of pressure to kind of have everything together and in order. So it's not like, I don't know, 100 years ago where you would be it wouldn't be a thing if you just got married out of high school and just had a baby when you were 19. It's just not how our culture is now. So we're expected, of course, to become well educated, often not even just one degree, right? Several decade of education, bringing us into our late 20s and early 30s. And then we have to kind of find the relationship and get the job and sort it all out, get the property, the home, right? And so basically what I'm saying is that our culture does not fit our biology. Because actually the best time and I'm not talking like just take out all the social implications for a moment, but the best time biologically to have a baby is obviously in your early 20s.
Yeah.
So we kind of have this in a different way. And I also see a lot the role of hormonal birth control in all of this, because when you have, like you said, the plan, okay, so we're getting married in the fall and then we're going to start having a baby. So I'm going to come off the pill in September, right before our wedding day.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to get pregnant. And often I've spoken to a number of women who they're planning this. We're all doing our best here. So they go to their doctors and it's like, okay, I'm getting married in the fall. Should I come off the pill even like 6 months earlier, do you think? And often the doctor says, no, if you get off, you'll just get pregnant right away. So you may as well wait until. And so what we are not made aware of is that even though there's no evidence to suggest that there is a long-term or permanent effect of birth control on fertility, because the evidence doesn't support that, there is a well-established temporary period of subfertility that is often not discussed. And so when you're like, for me, if I'm looking at different, like how this has been studied, there are studies that will just give you like the 12 months, like, okay, after 12 months, 75, 80% of women got pregnant. So there's no effect on fertility. But if you look at the studies that break it down month to month, what happens is, if you were to be using condoms, for example, and you were just to switch it out, right, take the condom off, then that's where you get the average of about, 25% chance per cycle. If you come off of hormonal birth control, though, like let's take the pill, for example, an average of 8 months. So double the time. Mm-hmm. And this might not seem like a big deal to the researchers because apparently it really doesn't. But for the average woman who has been preventing pregnancy actively, like the plague since she was in her late teens, like her whole 20s was actively doing everything possible to prevent, like being so responsible. Mm-hmm. Obviously, she thinks that as soon as you pull the goalie, this is going to happen because this is what we've been told. And it can. And it certainly can. And it does for some women. So of course, there's a certain percentage of women, they come off the pill, they ovulate 14 days later, and then they get pregnant. Some miscarry, some don't, but obviously this is a thing. But some women come off birth control and it takes them several months before they ovulate. And in some cases, more kind of, I would say less commonly, but in some cases, it can take quite a while, even a year or more. And so then by the time you're at month 6 or month 7 post birth control and you've been trying, you're already freaking out. Like you're freaking out by the second time you had your period. Right. Like the first time you're okay. Like you try and then you get your period. And then you're like, I get it. I was on the pill for a while, whatever. But the second month that you get your period, you're already freaking out. And this is why it matters. And this is why I think these conversations are really important, because the implication there is just that we need to, just like we plan for everything else, like you plan your wedding, you plan your home, we plan all these things, we plan our careers. But if we don't have the information about how our fertility works, then we don't often have that opportunity to plan. And so my suggestion in these cases is if you're able to, do consider, switching to a non-hormonal method before you're ready. So when you're still avoiding, go, with condoms or another non-hormonal method for a period of time, just so that you can give your cycles a chance to normalize and you can kind of see what's happening. So that if there's anything wrong, if it takes a couple months longer for your, ovulation to return and your periods to return normally, at least you have a buffer, because that's a lot less stressful to be going through that and sorting out the cycles when you're not actively trying.
What you're doing is giving people the solid evidence of that suboptimal fertility that could happen post birth control that maybe their doctors aren't sharing with them because they're just looking at the year-long data, which is completely
different. And it's
different.
crazy because I can see the perspective of, because what they're proving with their research is that there's no, like the pill doesn't cause infertility. Right. And what is important also to note about those studies, I'm like highly critical of all this stuff, is that if you, for example, had an issue with your cycle, let's say you were put on the pill because you had irregular cycles or because you had stopped getting your period, you were excluded from the study. They're not studying you because they know that the pill masks issues like that. And so if you didn't have your period or if you had irregular cycles and you were on the pill makes you bleed every 28 days, but it's not the same thing as an actual menstrual cycle. So let me know if you want to go into that.
Let's go. I would love to go into that because I think that that's going to be an aha moment for people who either didn't have their period and got on the pill and started having their period, or they have had regular cycles and went on the pill. Can you explain how hormonal birth control affects our body and our ovulation? And I love, and you can rant if you need to, I love that you put a warning box in your book, The Fifth Vital Sign. I love that you call the menstrual cycle a biomarker for women's health because it absolutely is. And it's telling us something's going on with our body and it's giving us that feedback. So let's get into the nitty gritty on birth control. What is it? How is it working? What is it masking?
All right. Okay. So birth control, the biggest myth I would say about birth control is that it regulates the cycle or that it tricks your body into thinking that you're pregnant or something like that. Because so as an adult female of reproductive age, your menstrual cycle is a part of the package. It's a package deal. So I often use the example of, if I buy a car, like if I were to opt to have that car without air conditioning, which why would I do that? But if I did, then if I get it without the AC, the car still works just fine because it's a machine and these parts are made separately and it doesn't matter. But as an adult female, me not having a normal, optimal menstrual cycle is the same thing as like me stopping having bowel movements.
Yeah.
Like no one would think that's okay. And if you do, you should get that checked out.
Yeah. You're probably very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So we need to, I think, get to a place where we start to understand, that's its own conversation. I think that the history of medicine has excluded women in many ways. A lot of the research studies are done on men or male animals, even because the female animals have this hormonal system that's complex. It screws up their studies. So they don't, they don't do that. But what that means for us is that often we're looked at as men, like little men, with these weird features.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing, understanding that the menstrual cycle is not an added feature. It's just a part of how our bodies work. And so when you stop menstruating, it's a sign of a problem. And a great example of that is hypothalamic amenorrhea, HA, because which is characterized by overexercise, undernutrition, and stress. So legitimately your body is starving and you're working out too much, you're not eating enough. And so you're starving. And so you lose your period because your body's highly intelligent and saying, this is not a good time to create more of you. And
we need to feed you first.
Correct. Yeah. There's not enough energy for me to give to another being, eat. And so what happens though, is women who lose their periods for 6 months or more, they have a higher lifetime risk of osteoporosis. So, losing your period or having issues with your cycle is a sign that there's something happening. So back to the pill. So when you're on hormonal birth control, the main way that it works is by suppressing ovulation. The majority of hormonal methods fully or at least partially suppress ovulation. So it's like if I buy a summer cabin and it's got this like leak in the water, line, and it's leaking everywhere. And so I cut the water line. And then like 3 years later, I go up there and I turn on the water and the leak is still there, right? That's basically what it is. So when you have a cycle issue, the pill just stops the whole thing. And the reason that you bleed every 28 days is because they give you artificial hormones for a period of time and then they take them away. And that causes your body to do a bit of a reset, which is what we call a withdrawal bleed. And so that isn't the same as a natural ovulation. A natural ovulation means that your ovaries are developing eggs, you're making estrogen, you ovulate, you make progesterone, and those two hormones combine to fully develop the uterine lining, and then you bleed if you're not pregnant afterwards. That is a true period. So when you, for example, like what you said, like if you just didn't have your period at all or something like that, and you went on the pill and then it gave you a bleed every 28 days, when you are ready then to start your family and you come off the pill, the water main is still broken because unless you somehow corrected that while on the pill, the underlying issue is still there because the pill doesn't actually fix that. And conversely, the pill isn't causing your infertility either because it simply masked what was happening under the hood of the car there. And so I think that's what's really important to know, because my version of feminism, speaking of rants, involves not only being able to avoid pregnancy when when I'm not ready to have a baby, but it also involves being able to have a baby when I'm ready. And this is the part of the conversation that the pill, that we could add to the pill, that we really desperately need to add to that. Because I can come across really anti-pill with because of how the detailed information that I've done or the detailed research that I've done about like the side effects, and I'm always on about that. But it's not about saying women shouldn't use the pill. It's just about saying that we should be able to understand fully what this thing is about, how it works, what it does. And also when I want to have a baby, what I can do to get myself ready. And so again, my suggestion is simply to seriously consider, if you have the runway, if you have the time, to give yourself a window. Just like I have car insurance for my car, I don't anticipate an accident. Mm-hmm. But if there is one, I have the insurance. So you don't anticipate that your cycle is not going to come back or that you're not going to be able to get pregnant when you want. But if you give yourself, and I would say a minimum of a year if you can do it, even a year and a half, and especially if you had problems, like if you had problems with your cycle, if you know that your cycle was super irregular or you had outrageous pain, like we could talk about that. But these things can indicate a potential challenge when you come off of it. So if you know that you are at a greater risk for those things, certainly consider 12, day 2, if you can.
Yeah.
If your insurance policy.
No, I think a lot of people, and it depends on when you meet your spouse or your person or whatever it is. But I think for a number of women, they, meet their person. They don't feel pressured to get engaged or get married. They're having fun. They're in their careers. I look back, Chris and I got together in 2007. We didn't get married until 2012, and we didn't have Sebastian until 2018. My parents were like, what the heck is happening? Are you guys okay? But I think there are a number of women that have the runway, and just having that information and understanding that they can do something about it and prepare their body and understand if they have underlying infertility issues. I mean, the pain piece is really interesting to me because it's one thing to not have your period or to have really irregular periods, period coming every 3 months or something, or really long cycles or something like that. But can we dive into pain? Because I think that's something that, a lot of women are put on the pill because they have really bad menstrual cramps or because they have acne. But pain is an interesting one because it's linked to an issue getting pregnant. And I'd love for you to get into that.
Yeah. I mean, pain with menstruation is really, really common, but I think common to the point that a lot of women just assume that it's normal and that it's part of being a woman and that this is just our lot in life, right? Like, often what I find with my clients is that I have to I have to make sure to ask, I have to make sure it's on my intake form, and I have to make them tell me, how bad is it? Because often they're so used to having it and they deal with it. We deal with it. So you're not even coming to me for that. You're not like, I have other problems. Like teach me about the birth control, like the pain, whatever. And so I feel like at least if you can hear someone at some point in your life say, yeah, it's common. And yeah, a lot of women experience pain, but it's not what we would consider normal or optimal. And outside of childbirth, there's no situation where having moderate to severe pain that could leave you on the floor, unable to move, would be considered all right. And if you imagine, any of your favorite men, your partner, brother, cousin, father, with severe pain in his penis, right?
They would have figured it out.
Yeah. So I feel like sometimes you got to put it to that kind of person, because why would anyone think that's okay? But this is, the low standard that we've been awarded to assume that this is acceptable. But I do recognize that it's a significant challenge. So I'm not here to say, don't manage it in whatever way you manage it. I think we all do the best that we can with what we know at the time. And if you have really significant pain, I wouldn't suggest just to stop taking the pill, without doing any type of work and learning and knowledge about what could be at the root of it. So I think it's really helpful to know that there is a difference between women who have severe pain and women who don't. And so when you look at the research, women who tend to have moderate to severe pain have upwards of 4 times the levels of prostaglandins, which is a marker of inflammation, Prostaglandins are a group of lipids that cause smooth muscle contractions. And so we need them when we have our period so that we release the uterine lining. So it's a part of it. But when you have significant pain, it's out of control, basically. Like you have way too much. And obviously you can feel that the cramps are just not, like it's just outside normal. But I feel like even that one piece of information to know that there's like a legitimate blood marker that is different in you if you have severe pain makes it real, especially if you've ever had that minimized. And so that means, okay, we have a beacon of light. It's associated with increased inflammation. So that means we can actually look to what can we do to reduce inflammation from, reducing our consumption of processed sugary crap to, looking at the oils that we're cooking with and looking at dairy. I'm not anti-dairy, but conventional dairy when the cows are eating the genetically modified corn and soy, that leads to more inflammatory meat, milk, and all of those products.
Preach.
Right?
Yeah.
So even just being aware of that for a lot of women, they'll experience some relief from switching up some of those dietary things. Some women then become aware of all of the chemicals and crap in all of our products. And so if you're using regular bleached tampons, they always, don't put anything in your vagina that you wouldn't put in your mouth. So some women actually experience some relief when they switch to organic products or reusable products like menstrual cups or things like that, reduce all the beauty products, right? Like everything with a smell, the plugins, all that stuff. So, for many women, this is a bit of a journey. And then on the flip side, what can we do to kind of reduce inflammation, again, like supplement wise? And so zinc and magnesium, fish oil, turmeric, a lot of women experience a great deal of relief with a combined approach. So that's not necessarily going to be enough for everybody, but it can be very significant. And so, my suggestion for someone who was put on the pill specifically because of that pain, I would say, again, the pill helps us to manage. So for many women, the pill and the painkillers, that gets us through the day. But when it comes to wanting to live your life and wanting to get pregnant at some point, you have to have another solution that can potentially at least get at that root cause. And so potentially working with a functional practitioner for a couple of months while you're still on the pill to address some of these issues to help with that transition, so that it's not necessarily as bad when you decide to come off of it. And again, doing this well in advance of when you want to try to have a baby, and also looking into abdominal therapy modalities. So like our Vigo Mercier therapy, like deep tissue abdominal therapy that can help reduce the pain. And if you have something like endometriosis, like these are kind of the things you can do before surgery. Like these are the things you can do that don't involve getting a laparoscopic procedure done that can really help. And so so that would be what I would say. And then again, this is part of your insurance policy. Everyone doesn't need to do that. But if you have that severe pain, it's helpful to know that the only option isn't come off the pill and like hope that it's not horrific.
Right. Right. Absolutely. I love that. I love that you're empowering people to understand how to decrease inflammation, and that there are blood markers like increased prostaglandins that are a marker to show us, hey, this is not in your head. This is real. You don't have to deal with this debilitating pain. You dropped so many nuggets of knowledge there that I kind of want to unpack some of those. And partly it overlapped with some of the oxidative stress stuff. So oxidative stress obviously creates inflammation in our body as well, and chromosomal is linked to chromosomal abnormalities. So we want to decrease oxidative stress. We want to decrease inflammation. And there are a number of supplements that we can all be taking probably out. I mean, I'm sure you would recommend something specific, but at least like a year to a year and a half, if you have the runway, like get off the pill, start taking these supplements, start cleaning these chemicals and hormones, exogenous hormones out of your life as much as you can. So what are some of your favorite supplements, and should our male counterparts be taking them as well?
Well, that's a really great question. And I would say, I mean, a lot of us are really deficient in magnesium. So I would say that, generally speaking, that can be really helpful. When I think about that runway and that preconception stage, I always think about it in terms of a combination of incorporating certain things from a dietary perspective as well as those key supplements, because I know that everybody is a bit different. And I have a lot of clients who are just like, I just take so much stuff, so, how can I balance this out? And so the approach that I take, I'm not one to recommend a specific diet, like to be very rigid about it. I take an ancestral approach to nutrition because I've always been a curious type. And I wonder, what did those people do before Whole Foods, right? Like, what did my grandma do? What did my great grandma do? And so certainly I talk a lot with my clients. If any of my clients are listening, they're going to be laughing about liver and organ meats, bone broth, soup, stews, of course, whole foods. And it's helpful to start to understand what nutrients that you need for optimal fertility, hormone health, as well as optimal, baby development. So as much as the conversation is about like, what can I do to get pregnant? All of us want the healthiest children. We want to have the healthiest pregnancies. And as a mom, once baby arrives, even if you were at your healthiest, most nutrient replete state, you're going to be exhausted. So it's not a good idea to go into pregnancy super depleted, because I always use kind of the bank account analogy. You're never going to go through 9 months of pregnancy and then a few months to a couple of years of breastfeeding and come out like more nutrient replete than you did coming in. Like, this is a season of your life where it's withdrawals, ladies.
Yeah.
And as much like the world, and of course me as well, is really, really concerned about baby, but I'm concerned about mom, because it's hard enough to be a new mom when you're good, like when you're pretty healthy. So those, there's many key nutrients of concern, and I probably won't list them all, but you really want to look at certain things. Iron is really important. Vitamin A is really important. B vitamins are really important. Folate, B12, all the Bs. Choline is really important. Iodine is really important. And zinc is really important. I mean, vitamin D is really important. We could just go on and on and on and on. Omega-3 fatty acids are really important. So I would say a combination, if you're open to it, consider incorporating organ meats. I know it's not everyone's favorite, but I'm not just a weirdo for the liver. Like, when you actually break it down, liver is the highest natural
It's
source.
the multivitamin.
Exactly. That is what they did before Whole Foods.
Yeah, it's the multivitamin. Yeah.
Well, and everyone's taking air quotes, but a lot of people are looking at coenzyme Q10, right? For the sperm and the egg health. It's a very popular supplement for good reason. There's a lot of research behind it. Where did they get that before Whole Foods? Well, it's highest in, liver and heart meat, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you don't want to eat it, there's plenty of ways to take it, right? Desiccated liver, liver powder, whatever. But that's just an example. Eating fish with this, eating sardines with the bone in, if you're open to that, eating shellfish and things like that. And then from my perspective, then the supplementation is part of it, but you can't really expect to get all of it from food. And for those who don't eat any meat, then there's ways to kind of sort that out. And you might have to rely more heavily on supplementation for certain nutrients that you can't get without the meat. So it's a complex conversation there.
There are a few experts that I love in the fertility and pregnancy space, but there's very little talked about when it comes to nutrition, like prior to getting pregnant, when you're actively trying, when you're pregnant, what your baby needs, what you're going to see yourself, what's going to be depleted at the end of pregnancy, how to test if you're depleted. I love the lactation lab, and I had Dr. Canali on the show. She started the lactation lab at UCLA just to understand wow, my breast, if I'm low in vitamin D and choline and iodine and iron and DHA and my breast milk is that way, then my baby's brain, and if that's their only nutrition, is deficient in that and not growing cognitively the way I want it to. And it's empowering to know. But what came out of the research and what continues to come out of the research is that the most nutrient dense way to get all of these B vitamins, to get all these fat soluble vitamins, to get all of the minerals you're talking about is through animal protein. And if you're not eating animal protein, you should absolutely be optimizing your nutrition with supplementation. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I have a full video and 40-page downloadable PDF for that one exact video, because I think it's just over people's head and they don't feel so great in the first trimester and they're just having their crackers or whatever. And I get it. I was there with this pregnancy, but it's so important.
One thing I'll just jump in and say, because I was fortunate when I was pregnant both times. I'm the one you hate. Like I had a little bit of nausea one, like, I'm that girl.
Yeah.
But most women aren't that girl. And so, on the opposite end, one of my best friends, like legitimately like projectile vomited for 5 months and she needed, I think it's called diclectin.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is that when you have that runway and you're able to learn, really dive into specific nutrition for fertility, as well as, again, adding supplementation to fill in the gaps. Because there are certain nutrients you can't actually get from food, like vitamin D.
Yeah.
But when you do that and you really prepare during that runway, and ideally, of course, 6 to 12 months, if you have, again, the time and the ability to do that, then if you do find yourself real, sick during that first trimester and you can't really keep anything down but the crackers because they're salty and it's the only thing that isn't making you want to throw up, then you don't have to feel any kind of ways about it because you know that you did the best you can. I mean, and there's no perfect here. We all do the best that we can. If you're in that situation right now, you're listening in the first trimester, you're like, I didn't do this. You'll have trimesters 2 and 3 when it settles down. It is okay.
Yeah. It's a long time to be pregnant and like adding postpartum, we're talking about a year of your life. So let's not stress out. You can always get back on the horse. You can always start to focus on nutrient density. So when it comes to antioxidants, outside of like the fat soluble vitamins, the water soluble vitamins, the minerals, and like the fatty acids that you mentioned, CoQ10, curcumin, or what maybe people are taking turmeric. They haven't heard of curcumin, things like that. What would you say if you had like a little mini hit list of what the male should be taking to increase sperm quality? What should we have our guys on?
So vitamin A is at the top of my list, and that's not necessarily one that I hear everyone going on about. But and when you are not the one who's getting pregnant, you could potentially supplement with that as well if you're not willing to eat the liver or take the cod liver oil or whatever the case is. So vitamin A tops the list because it's really crucial for sperm development. It's part of the process of sperm development, to the point that there's actually research about enzymes that inhibit vitamin A production and absorption as a possible contraceptive for men. It's interesting. So when I describe this to my clients, there are animal studies, and I understand that we're not like rats and like rabbits and stuff, but there are animal studies where if you feed the animals a vitamin A deficient diet, the male animals stop making testosterone and they stop making sperm. And the female animals, they call it fetal reabsorption in the animals, but the female animals basically can't get pregnant. And if they get pregnant, they have miscarriages. So vitamin A is really crucial. And that's something that I think, like, get that in. Eat the liver, take the cod liver oil, whatever, get it in. So in addition to that, it's basically a mirror image of what the women need to take. Because I always think back to, in utero, there's a place where we're not differentiated, where the boys and the girls look the same. We're made out of the same stuff, legitimately, our parts and his, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense then that it's not so different. So What's crucial for male fertility then, in addition to vitamin A, certainly vitamin D is important. Coenzyme Q10, as you mentioned, folate, zinc, L-carnitine, antioxidants in general, so vitamin C certainly has been shown to reduce sperm DNA damage. And so this is so that you kind of understand what's happening. I mean, the parameters, kind of the air quotes, normal parameters that are outlined by the World Health Organization. They're looking at morphology, which is how the sperm looks. They're looking at motility. And so the coenzyme Q10 is crucial, again, to support the mitochondria so they have normal movement. And these antioxidants that we're talking about then are intended to minimize that oxidative stress and the sperm DNA damage. And so, there is a relationship then between how they look. So when I say morphology too, I show my clients pictures because picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
But when you think about what a sperm looks like, we all have an image of like a circular head and a tail. But when the sperm is abnormal, it might not have a head, it might not have a tail, it might have a malformed head, it might have 2 heads. So that is not capable of fertilizing an egg. And so when the sperm is also kind of off, there may be a higher chance that it's going to also have this issue with DNA damage. And so when the sperm is damaged in that way, it can mean that it could be like that particular sperm wouldn't be chosen, or in general, So yeah, there's a whole other tangent I could go into, but I won't. But let's say that, the healthiest man alive, the majority of even his sperm is abnormal. Yeah. And so what the World Health Organization says is optimal, or not optimal. What the World Health Organization says is acceptable is 4% morphology, a sperm concentration of 15 million sperm per milliliter, and I believe a 40% motility. And so what that means is out of every 100 sperm, 4 of them look normal and 96 of them look squashed and kind of messed up. And then from a scientific perspective, when you look at what point does the additional healthy sperm not increase the per cycle chance? So like, for example, if you had 400 million, does it make that big of a difference if it's 500 million? So that kind of 0 point is about 15% morphology. So 15 out of every 100 is normal and 85 are squashed, kind of weird looking. 68% motility, and about 50 million sperm per milliliter. So I know I'm giving a lot of specific numbers, but my point is that even the healthiest man alive, the majority of his sperm are abnormal. And so, I mean, we could get into the weeds with fertility awareness goodies, but one of the reasons that I think charting your cycle and understanding that aspect is so interesting is because when you're in your fertile window, that's when you're making cervical fluid, like kind of clear, stretchy stuff, or it kind of looks like white, creamy white hand lotion. And one of the fascinating aspects about it is that it screens abnormal sperm. So our bodies, when we're fertile, are actively screening out the sperm that can't swim properly and the sperm that's kind of squashed, weird looking. So only the healthy ones get through. And so, I mean, this is all very interesting, right? So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts here. So there's a lot we can do to improve, certainly his sperm by making sure he's getting his nutrients in, making sure he's doing his part. And again, this is more argument for taking that runway, because to see the results of what you're doing, it takes a minimum of about 4 months. So if your partner were to ejaculate today, he's basically giving you a printout of his health about 4 months ago, because that's how long it takes to make the sperm. And similarly with our egg quality, it takes, so, on the general end, you want about 3 to 4 months, but that egg that you ovulated this month started really in its final trajectory 7 to 8 months ago.
I love it. This is great. This is great information. And I think really eye-opening for people to even understand what quality looks like in the quote unquote perfect man, and to understand our role in it. I mean, it's, you mentioned charting a couple of times. I'd love for you to go through how and what charting is, and to talk a little bit more about cervical fluid and how that supports fertility.
Yeah, for sure. So cycle charting is kind of my main shtick. So basically what it means is that you're learning to understand what's happening in your cycle. So it's always helpful to start, like we talked about the myth that you're fertile every single day. So you're not. There's, from a scientific perspective, 6 days of the cycle where pregnancy is possible. So it's completely the opposite of what most of us were taught when we were growing up. So if I were to take you through the menstrual cycle, you have your period. And so your cycle starts like the first day of your period, the first day of your true flow. So many women may have a couple days of spotting or something like that before, but when you actually need, the pad, the tampon, you need to do something about it. And so once your period comes to an end, you're in your pre-ovulatory phase, it's called. So your body's gradually approaching ovulation. As that happens, your body's making estrogen as those follicles are growing. And that is what causes you to make the cervical fluid. So, many women may have noticed this. And I know I can remember when I was a teenager, I started to see it, but I didn't know what it was. And my mom, didn't know what it was either. But I remember going to her and being like, my underwear's like wet. I don't know. And she was like, just wear panty liners. And that was the conversation. But if you've ever had that where there's a certain time of the cycle where you're kind of wet, where you go to the bathroom and you wipe and it's like slips I always joke that like your hand hits the back of the toilet seat. You look, and you look at it, it's like clear and stretchy, kind of poopy. So that is normal and it's healthy. And it's just understanding cervical fluid is the key to understanding fertility. When you're trying to get pregnant, regardless of what, when that ovulation predictor kit turns positive, when you see the cervical fluid is when you have the sex. So your body naturally produces cervical fluid as you approach ovulation. And then once you ovulate, your ovaries are making a ton of progesterone, and the progesterone actually shuts down that cervical fluid production for the rest of the cycle. And for those of you who may be aware and familiar with fertility awareness cycle charting, the three main signs that you pay attention to are your cervical fluid, your basal body temperature, and then the optional cervical position. And so after ovulation, when your progesterone goes up, progesterone causes your core body temperature to rise, which is really interesting because if you're kind of like a nerd like I am, it means you can track this and actually confirm when in your cycle ovulation happened, which is very helpful when you're trying to conceive because then you can get really close to that due date, right? Like the accurate due date. You also know exactly when in your cycle to have sex, to get pregnant, because I think a lot of women discover this like not the way that they were hoping, but you know, you've been on the pill for so long, you finally start trying to get pregnant. It doesn't happen the first cycle or the first couple cycles. And all of a sudden you stumble on all of this knowledge that there's actually like a point in the cycle where you can get pregnant and points that you can't. So that's basically the lowdown. And so what's interesting is that, you know, the female body, I always say Mother Nature's, you know, much smarter than we are. So it kind of makes sense if you think about it, that there's only a short time in your cycle where pregnancy is possible because your uterus is an internal organ. And so it wouldn't just be open for potential viruses or, you know, all the time. It's really only open during that time when something should be in there. Like it's really only open when the sperm should actually be in there. And outside of that time, the cervix is actually closed and blocked. And your vagina is quite acidic, and that acidity helps to protect you from viruses and all that kind of stuff. And so when you are in the fertile window, the cervical fluid, it's like a home away from home for the sperm. It's a similar pH to his seminal fluid. It's alkaline, it's wonderful, welcoming. Your cervix is the base of your uterus, and it has these little folds. And it's like a video game, like when I describe this to people, because your cervical fluid rapidly draws the sperm into the cervical crypts. It's like a hotel in there, and they can hang out for up to 5 days. And then right before ovulation, you know, the sperm that are still in those crypts are kind of pushed into the uterus. So there's a whole kind of conspiracy going on in your uterus to help this whole process of natural conception. And cervical fluid plays a really key role. So the takeaway is when you see the cervical fluid, when you see the clear stretchy stuff, when you're trying to get pregnant, have sex. If you're not trying to get pregnant, put a condom on or something.
Perfect. Perfect. So let's talk about how, when someone sees cervical fluid on average, how long after that does ovulation take place?
That's a great question. So, I mean, in a typical healthy, normal cycle, you would expect to see cervical fluid anywhere from about 2 to 7 days as you approach ovulation. And so because this is all related to hormones, there's something that we refer to in the fertility awareness world as your peak day. And so that is not the day that you have the most cervical fluid. That is the last day. So if you're tracking your cycle, you wouldn't know. So if you had cervical fluid, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you wouldn't know on Friday that it's the last day. But on Saturday, if you no longer see your cervical fluid, then you can look back and say, okay, that was the last day. And so, you know, in the fertility awareness world, we care about the peak day or the last day that you see that cervical fluid, because ovulation is highly correlated with peak day. So it doesn't always happen on peak day, but up to 80% of the time, it's happening either on peak day, you know, plus or minus 1. So what I always say is that, you know, the best way to confirm ovulation would be a daily ultrasound. But I don't know anybody who has an ultrasound machine in their house. Yeah. So the second best way to do this is through these fertility awareness charting techniques. So by looking at the cervical fluid, identifying that last day, you know that most of the time, if the cycle's healthy and normal, it's going to be around then. And if you add the daily temperature taking, so that just means, you know, you take your temperature first thing in the morning before you get out of bed. There's lots of wearable devices now to make it easier. When your temperature actually rises, that is telling you, again, in retrospect, that you likely ovulated the day before. So you're looking for what we call a sustained thermal shift, meaning that the temperature goes up and stays high. So you'll have like a group of temperatures before ovulation that are a bit lower, but they they fluctuate, but they're kind of lower. And you should be able to basically draw a line in between the lower and the higher. So when they rise, they just stay high for the rest of the cycle. And so once you have those 3 temperatures in a row that are higher than the previous 6 is what I teach my clients. That also helps you to confirm. So you can put those 2 markers together and be fairly certain that ovulation happened. Like you can usually get it. I would say within a day. I would say this way is when you're doing it correctly, when you kind of are comfortable with all of these little details, it's within about a day, which is pretty good. And you don't have to buy an ultrasound machine. I've been doing this for like 20 years. And so when I started, it was printing out Excel spreadsheets and stuff. So I would say that you don't need a fancy thermometer to chart. You can get away with a $20 one. Usually it's nice to have one that has a backlight if you want, or that has memory, maybe so that if you're fumbling around, you can put it on later on. It'll remember. So you can start with something like that. Certainly, if you really love tech, I know some of my clients have said, like, when I bought the $100 thermometer that syncs with my phone, my partner was like, wow, she's serious. So, so certainly, there's an argument to be made for buying all the expensive gadgets. But if you're just getting started, just, legitimately just get a, $20 thermometer, get a few features that you want, but you don't have to go overboard.
I love it. I love keeping it simple. I'm a total minimalist. So this is no more, I don't need any more chargers in my house for anything else. So I love that. And on average, we obviously have that lower temperature and then a rise. Would you give us a ballpark of like the temperatures you would see on the low end and the high end?
Well, so there's a pretty big range. So I'll first start by what I would consider to be healthy. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at the temperatures before ovulation, you want hopefully for those temperatures to be about 97.4 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, like 36.3 or 4 degrees Celsius, depending on where you live. So when you're looking at that chart, ideally, the temperatures aren't really dropping lower than that. And the post-ovulatory temperatures are always going to be relative to the pre-ovulatory temperatures. So in that example, the post-ovulatory temperatures likely will be, 97.9 and higher. At least 1 or 2 temperatures should be higher than the 98 mark. And then centigrade similar in that kind of 37 range.
Got it. Yeah.
And a lot of women, when they start charting, a pretty decent percentage will find that their temperatures are lower than that. And so the temperatures are measuring your metabolic rate, so your baseline metabolism. And so, there are plenty of functional practitioners, including traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, who have their clients take their temperature to measure their metabolism. And so if it's really low, you just want to understand that it's not supposed to be really low. And there's reasons for that. It's not always only thyroid. I know that a lot of women will assume it must be thyroid, but it can be related to, are you eating enough food? If you skip meals all the time, your body has to compensate somehow, and often it makes you cold to reserve energy. So sometimes it's basic stuff like that. Like, are you eating enough food, getting enough sleep? Are you, all that kind of stuff. It can be related to nutrient deficiencies, from zinc to iodine to iron. And it can also, of course, be related to thyroid issues as well.
Well, touching on thyroid issues, that's a major cause of miscarriage and something that we want to rule out to make sure that we're fertile. Are there any other big causes of infertility that our audience should be aware of?
Yeah, we've touched on a few. We talked a bit about period pain, and I think what I can say to that as well is that when women have really severe pain that isn't really helped by pain medication, that may not even be helped by birth control, that happens throughout the cycle and with sex. And so it's not just during your period. That can be a sign of endometriosis. So women that have severe pain obviously have endometriosis at a higher rate, but all women with endometriosis do not have pain. And so that's something to be aware of, because there are cases of unexplained infertility that are related to endometriosis. And so from the most simplest perspective, endometriosis is characterized by, endometrial tissue that is growing outside of the uterus and causing then issues, scar tissue. Obviously, there's a lot of inflammation and some degree of immune system dysregulation. So there's a lot going on there. And that's something to be aware of because, like I said, some women don't have any pain and their symptom of endometriosis is unexplained infertility. So that's something to be aware of. Polycystic ovary syndrome is talked about a lot with regards to infertility. But I think it's interesting because there's a lot going on there. But polycystic ovarian syndrome is characterized by long, irregular cycles, as well as insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, and inflammation. So we have this theme of inflammation going through. And one of the challenges with PCOS is that when a woman has uncontrolled PCOS, so she has not gotten on top of the blood sugar regulation and the insulin resistance and things like that, her cycles can be very long. So all over 35 days, maybe 40, 50 days, sometimes 60 days, sometimes going, having fewer than 8 or 9 periods a year. And so when that happens, you have fewer chances. And if you're not charting and you don't understand your cycles, then it can be really hard. Like if you go 60 days between periods and there's only 6 days from a scientific standpoint where pregnancy is possible, what are the chances that you're going to randomly hit that if you don't know what to look for? So I would say that it's not certainly impossible for women with PCOS to get pregnant. That might be a myth, but it's certainly challenging. And overall, it's going to be easier for pregnancy to happen and for everything to kind of fall into line when your body when it's controlled, like when you have the insulin sensitivity sorted out, when you have the glucose intolerance, like when you kind of sort that out, your cycles are normal. Because this is the whole purpose of the concept of the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. So when the cycles are completely off, that is a sign that there's something underlying. When you correct that underlying factor, the cycles go back into line.
I love that.
And I would say there's a lot of things I think that are helpful when you're doing an analysis. So if you're trying to conceive and it's not happening, and I would say it's helpful to to get that nutrient analysis done to make sure that you're good there. What are your levels like? So vitamin D is crucial. Women who are deficient in D are certainly more likely to experience a prolonged period of fertility challenges. Iodine is huge. Now, even my stance on iodine may differ from basically most of the stances I've kind of heard out there, because I think that it's important to test a person for iodine, similar to how we would test for vitamin D, even if that person has a thyroid issue, because certainly there's an argument that I hear quite a bit that if a person has a thyroid issue, iodine is the worst thing you should take. But if I have a thyroid issue and I'm deficient in iodine, and iodine deficiency contributes to an increased chance of infertility and complications, then I should be we can't make assumptions. So just like I can't tell anybody, you need to take exactly this much vitamin D. I mean, I can make a suggestion, but unless we actually test your vitamin D levels, we can't actually tell you how much vitamin D you need. And ideally, we would test the vitamin D, get you on the supplement, test you again, and see if what we're doing is working. So that's my stance on iodine. And we could say that about a number of different nutrients, but I would say at least if you kind of get analyzed in that respect and you can address some of those underlying issues, like PCOS, for example, women are often deficient in vitamin D and magnesium as well. It's not uncommon for women with thyroid issues to be deficient in, iodine and zinc and iron and things like that. So I think it's time that we start looking at women more holistically, and also because it's not just about getting pregnant. The mom has to parent these children afterwards. Yeah. Most women have waited so long to get pregnant, right? We wanted everything to work out. Finally, I met the guy, I have the job, everything is good. So then you don't just want to have one, you often want to have a couple in a very short period of time.
Yeah. And then the second time around, if you're not really aware of your nutrient deficiencies, you feel it on the back end. And I think the majority of my clients, and something I experience personally, is when you're going back to back, having babies back to back, and you're not super diligent about supplementation. And even if you are doing a great job with your food, but you're not getting checked appropriately, and you just go from being pregnant to breastfeeding I weaned Sebastian and peed on a stick the next day and was pregnant and was like, well, here we go again. So, my first pregnancy, I was like you. I felt amazing. I could eat my salads, drink my smoothies. I had so much energy. I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And all the hormones, I was like this is the best drug ever. Like, I actually felt amazing. This time around, I know I wasn't as diligent as I should have been when I was breastfeeding. The prenatals that I take are, it's a lot of pills. It can be a lot for people. And when you have a toddler and when you're sleep deprived and all that, and then you get pregnant again, even when we're trying our best, sometimes it's like that reminder that you're going back to back, really paying attention to those nutrient levels is not only going to increase the egg quality of your second child, it's going to increase how you feel throughout your second pregnancy, your ability to get pregnant again, all of those wonderful things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, again, like it's on the other side, you want your children to be as healthy as you can. You just want to do the best you can. I mean, it's becoming a mom has been just this incredible ride for me personally. And certainly there's a lot that you learn, a lot that you know. And so I suppose one of the things that I certainly wish I had known before my first pregnancy was much of the information I shared with you today about nutrition and things like that, because my husband and I would have been great to do all kinds of stuff, but we didn't really know, like most people. So I had an interesting experience with my youngest. He had a couple kind of strange developmental things at the very beginning. And I did not experience those things with my second child. And so I can't speak to exactly why. It's not scientific assessment. But as a mom, I just feel that, again, after you become a mom, people joke like, oh, you'll never sleep again and all that kind of stuff. But certainly those first few years when you have an infant that is entirely dependent on you for everything. And when you're in those early stages, if you're able to breastfeed and you're breastfeeding and you see that this tiny little baby is gaining double its weight and it didn't eat anything, it's just you. It really kind of brings it full circle that this is more than just about, like, this is about fostering healthy children.
Absolutely.
And healthy moms.
And healthy moms. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how fast the brain grows developmentally in the first 3 years of life. And to know that it has so much to do with the nutrients that they have access to through the food that they're being given, whether that's formula or breast milk or, when they start eating solid foods and all of those things. It's just, we do have a lot of power over this very finite amount of years that can be just such a benefit to them their whole entire life. So, yeah, it's not a reason to feel guilty as a mom, obviously. Like, we have enough mom guilt friends. But it is, no, I always just say no better, do better.
Yeah.
You can't feel bad about stuff we don't know.
It's true. And I feel like in a way it's selfish because it's like, I want to also be well, right? Yeah. Like, I feel like there's it's almost this like fatalist, like, I distinctly remember my doctor telling me, the baby will always get what it needs. And this is the culture that we have. The baby will always get what it needs. But no one's asking if the mom is going to get what it needs. So I feel like instead of feeling guilty, just be selfish and make sure that you do this. Like, I get it. Do it for your baby too, but do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. We had a limited amount of resources after Sebastian was born, and I opted for meal delivery over a night nurse. And I did that because I had there's this company that delivered to my clients named Kushi in LA, and they deliver all over Southern California, but it's like pasture raised proteins, red meats, like salmon, like shellfish, like shrimp, like all the veggies, lots of really healthy fats, avocado, olive oils, like curries, all that stuff. And it wasn't every day, but a couple of days a week, I just have them drop off a couple of meals. My husband was like, we need the sleep. I was like, babe, I need the food. This is my job. This to me is self-care. Like, I can handle the sleep deprivation and we can tag team this baby. But like, for us to feel our best, like it's all about nourishing ourselves. So, I think sorting out your priorities as a mom and what you need is obviously for our listeners is like so important. For you personally, definitely know who you are and get the support that you need if you can. But that was my choice, just priorities are in a different place. So,
well, and that's a really important example because so I experience this. I'd be curious if you experience this or if like most moms experience this, but you kind of go out the window because, fortunately, my husband was around, especially the first month after, and he would feed me.
Yeah.
Because if you've never had a baby before, I remember I had a friend, one of my friends, she was, I think, I don't know, somewhere in that first mom haze, first couple months. And I made a comment like, man, I can barely find time to take a shower. And she was like, you always have time to take a shower. I was like, oh, you just wait.
Yeah.
But it's easy to forget about yourself because there is so much going on. And when you have an infant, especially, I mean, it depends on what's going on in your life. Like, do you have 16 sisters that can all come over and take turns holding the baby? Do you have a wonderful relationship with your parents and your in-laws that they're always in your house and very helpful and not unhelpful?
And not a guest that you're hosting as a new mom.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, if you've got certain things in place, but for a lot of moms, particularly in this current time when things are a little bit less certain and it might be a little bit more difficult to find individuals who are comfortable being in your house and helping you, it can be really hard. And so what you said about the food, because you got to take care of you. You have to put on your, what did they say?
Oxygen mask. Yeah.
Your oxygen mask first.
Yeah.
And you're feeding, the baby is drinking out of you.
Definitely.
Literally sucking the nutrients out of your body. So you need to get that in there.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah.
I love it so much. Well, I feel like you've been just like I said in the beginning, just like a beacon of light and an educator. And if anything, if people are listening and they haven't, they're not planning to get pregnant, thinking about getting off hormonal protection methods and using physical protection methods, charting their cycle, getting to know themselves, getting serious about either taking a high quality prenatal that has choline and DHA and all of the B vitamins in the proper form. She mentioned folate, not folic acid, friends. Things like that, and really starting to understand what was your period like before you went on the pill, and making sure that it's not going to take you 8 months after you get off birth control, and that you'll be the average. And you'll hopefully get pregnant in those first 4. It's just a lot of really informative information that I think people can start, especially us as women. Like, we love to be planners, so we can get out there and plan appropriately with more information. It's been so fun. And I want people to follow along with you the way that I do. And I want them to continue to learn from you. So I can't thank you enough for sharing your personal story and for sharing some of your knowledge. I know that there are women out there who are probably trying to get pregnant, and this is going to change their life.
Oh, well, thank you so much. This has been obviously great. We could have talked all day because there's so much to talk about. And I could tell we're both super passionate about this, because it really does. When people say it's life-changing, it's easy to kind of be like, but it is. It really changes the quality of your life. So whether it's reducing your pain with periods, I've never met a woman who wouldn't love to go from her 8 out of 10 to like 4, like even if that's what you get at the first couple of months. So whether it's that or whether it's really getting to the root of what's happening with your cycles, just having that deeper understanding and having that knowledge that this could be a sign of something else, to be that first part in your path to healing and optimal health. I mean, it really is life-changing. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Oh my gosh. We'll definitely have you back. But where can people follow along now if they're interested in more fertility information? I mean, you have your Instagram and your podcast and your book and your blog. So give us all the nitty-gritty.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. So on Instagram, I'm at Fertility Friday, and I share a lot of interesting, inflammatory, sometimes ranty things over there, and it's a lot of fun. And I've had the Fertility Friday podcast now. I'm in my 6th year, which is kind of hard to believe. So over 300 episodes, and I've almost hit 3 million downloads. As I haven't hit it yet, but I checked the thing the other day, and I was like, wow, this is cool.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks. So lots. If this conversation interested you in terms of the charting and, even the birth control stuff and understanding your cycle and the conception stuff, you'll love the podcast. You can just search Fertility Friday on your favorite podcast player. And of course, the book, The Fifth Vital Sign, that was my response to what I often hear from women, which is everyone needs to know this stuff. Like, why wasn't I taught this? So I'm not one to wait for the government to decide this is important. So I just, wanted to put what I had, all of this information that took me, 2 decades to assemble into one place. And so the Fifth Vital, signedbook.com, if you want to grab the first chapter for free, but it's available on Amazon. And for all of you science heads out there, there's over 1,000 research citations that you can, so you don't take my word for it, like fact check me, do what you need to do.
Yeah. That's why I love you, girl. I am all about those references. No, it was a phenomenal read, and I added it to the book club list in my pregnancy course because I think it's a must read for people, especially going through and understanding preconception and understanding what people might call the trimester or trimester 0, or that 3 or 4 months prior to getting pregnant. Like, what should that look like? And I think understanding your period is the first thing you should know if you're looking to get pregnant. So that's actually the first on our list. Get to know your body first, and then get your body and your eggs ready for the sperm. So thank you so much. I'm so excited to share this episode. It's, as you know, I'm all about women's health right now because I got a huge belly and I'm ready to have this baby. So thank you for your time today. It was such a pleasure.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.